On a hill far away stood an old rugged cross, the emblem of suffering and shame. And I love that old cross where the dearest and best for a world of lost sinners was slain. So I'll cherish the old rugged cross, to my trophies at last I lay down. I will cling to the old rugged cross and exchange it one day for a crown. To the old rugged cross I will ever be true, its shame and reproach gladly bear. Then He'll call me away to that home far away. In His glory forever we'll share. Sing with me. So I'll cherish the old rugged cross, to my trophies at last I lay down. I will cling to that old rugged cross and exchange it one day for a crown. Oh, I can't wait to do that. Can't wait to do that. Today we're going to begin a series on one of the fun books. You know, we spent last few weeks in 2 Peter. It got a little bit rough there. It got a little bit ragged around the edges, a little bit of warning. And so I thought it was time for us to consider joy, happiness. You know, sometimes we get so busy with all the stuff that's going on around us, the chores and the stuff that just seems crashing in around us, that we forget to enjoy ourselves. And it just seems that all around us things are crumbling. And it seems that my job's no good. The people I work with are hard to get along with. They have higher expectations of me than they should. And Lord knows our government's crumbling around us. And God gave us a solution for that. He gave us something we could do about that. Yeah, we could pray, but He gave us 2 words to help us out with all of that. 2 words. You ready for it? Quit complaining. It's not going to change. It's the way it is. So just stop your complaining. You know, that's just the nature of us, I guess. That's part of our sinful nature. You know, from the moment that you come out of your mom's womb, somebody slapped you on the bottom, you've been crying ever since. You know, I'm wet, I cry. I'm hungry, I cry. I need picked up, so I cry. And it just, our nature. Does anybody here know who Emmanuel Cleaver is? I didn't think so. When we lived in Kansas City, he was a councilman up there, and he's gone on from that time to be he went on to be a mayor of Kansas City. In fact, I think he was probably the first black mayor that Kansas City had back in the 80s. After that, he went on to become a congressman. And he introduced a bill, or tried to introduce a bill, that the Wednesday before Thanksgiving would be a happy bill. You know, that we'd have a day of being happy. That the day before Thanksgiving would be a no complaining day. And you know what happened? it never got out of committee because of people complaining and arguing about it. I've told you all before, I've got a friend that told me one time, he said, what every church needs is we need to have an annual get over it day, where you take everything that's bothered you all year long, all those people who have offended you, all those people that didn't see things the way you did, and come to the altar and just get over it and start new. I think we need to do that. I think we need to do that. I need to do it about once a day, because by the time I get to the end of the day, somebody's aggravated me. But we need a get over it day. So Emmanuel's legislation didn't pass. And you know, our church is the same way. We've got those things that bother us. And if we decided that we were going to have that get over it day, somebody probably complaining about it. Somebody probably say, no, we need to do something different than that. But it's not new. Been around for a long time. People have been struggling with it for a long time. And I can't help but think that, you know, that this complaining thing and Christians, they ought not be the same. We ought to be the happiest people, the most joyful people on earth. We've got so much to be thankful for. God's done so much for us, and yet we get wrapped up in this. It goes clear back. I'm thinking about the Israelites. In fact, we're going to look at that a little bit. We're going to get to Philippians, but we may not get to it today. But they should have been the most happy people in the world. 400 years they were in slavery. 400 years they were persecuted, made to work, made to do things that they didn't want to do, actually owned by the other people. And we know those 10 plagues that come about. They affected the Egyptians, but they didn't affect the Israelites. They should have seen God working in that, shouldn't they? And then we come to that last one, the plague of the death of the firstborn. God told them, said, you sacrifice a lamb. You put the blood up over the doorpost. And when the death angel comes, he will pass over you. We still celebrate that today every time we take the Lord's Supper, every time we remember Passover, about Jesus being the sacrifice for you and I. And these guys are set free. And they're so joy-filled and so happy that they made it almost to the Red Sea before they started complaining. They said, Moses, was there so few graves in Egypt that you brought us out here to die? We need to just go back to slavery. Now, that makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? We need to go back to slavery. But this thing of them getting out of Egypt was just so spectacular and so miraculous. One of the things I want to point out to you is, in fact, go there. Just go there with me. Exodus chapter 11. Exodus chapter 11. And I'm going to be looking at verse 6. Because it shows just how precise God's plan can be. And this is just before they're leaving Egypt. And it says, there shall be a great cry. This is verse 6, 11:6. There shall be a great cry throughout all the land of Egypt, such as there's never been before nor will ever be again. In other words, the death angel is going to come. And he's going to wipe it all out. Tragedy like they've never experienced before. But then in verse 7 he says, but not a dog shall growl against any of the people of Israel, either man or beast, that you may know that the Lord makes a distinction between Egypt and Israel. That's interesting. Now you got to remember that these Israelites, Hebrews, there was over 1 million of them. And when they left town, they didn't just up and leave. The Egyptians were begging them to leave. They didn't leave poor slaves. They left enriched. Remember? Just before that, they'd been and they asked the Egyptians for all their gold and silver jewelry, and they said, sure, take it. Get out of here. Go. Just get out of here. But then in the middle of the night, when they left, 1 million people stirring, and not a dog even barked. You ever notice at night, if you as much as turn on your porch light, or the slightest movement, that the neighbor's dog seems to notice and bark? I know I'm saying the neighbor's dog because I know it wouldn't be your dog. But you can't stir anything. Shows that even in something as minute as that God is so specific. Shut up the dogs. That everything's going to be quiet as you move out of this place. As you go to this place, that I'm going to virtually stop time while this happens. So he took them out of there, not even a dog barking. So they were free, they were rich, and they should have been so joyful. Should have been so happy. And like I said, then you see that down in chapter 14, there in verse 11 is where it says, Is it because there were no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away into the wilderness? Fear not, stand firm, and see the salvation of the Lord. That's what Moses told them. He said, God's going to do something great. Actually, what God said is, shut up. I got something for you here that you don't even know what you've got. Look back. I gave you their riches. I gave you your freedom. I even silenced the world while you came out. And you're starting this? Just shut up. Listen to me. I've got something for you. Fear not. Stand firm and see the salvation of the Lord. And, you know, that picture, though, it's not just of the ancient people, is it? You and me. We should be so filled with joy. You know, we look at what's going on in the world right now. We look at this election coming up. Of the things in this election coming up, one thing I can be sure of is come Tuesday or Wednesday or whenever this thing gets figured out, half the people in the country are going to be upset. Half of them are going to be mad. Half of them are going to be grumbling. But that half of people, they're still going to live in the richest, greatest nation in the world. Amen. And they're going to complain. They're not going to be happy. But you know what else I can tell you about this election? That no matter which side wins, no matter who stands up and says they are the greatest, that when the election's over, Jesus is still going to be king. Amen. He's still going to be my Lord. He's still going to be the one that we have to follow. We talked a little in Sunday school this morning about that, about all the stuff that's going on. And it's just a little bitty thing in the scope of eternity that God is giving us. You might say that it's a dog barking. It's got about that much significance in the realm of everything. We talked about that not just our life and how short our life is in comparison to eternity, but how short the entire world history is. If you believed, like some would tell us, that the earth is millions of years old, how long is 1,000,000 years in comparison to eternity? Just a little dot. Just a little spot. And that's where the cross took me. That's where the cross took you, was to that. You know, there was a tourist and he was walking along the pier and he looked up there and he saw this fisherman. He got to watching this fisherman. The fisherman was catching a few fish and he noticed that he'd take a ruler out with each fish. And the ruler was broke. And he'd put the fish up against it. And if it was smaller than the ruler, he'd put it in the bucket. If it was bigger than the ruler, he'd throw it out, throw it back. You know, this seems backwards than anything I ever did fishing. He watched him a little bit, and he finally couldn't stand it any longer. He went over and he asked him, he said, "What's the deal here?" He said, "I see that, first of all, you got this broken ruler," and he said, "You're measuring fish against it, but you're keeping the little ones and you're throwing the big ones back." And he said, "Look at this ruler." The fisherman did. He said, "It broke off at 10 inches. And he said, that was on purpose. He said, "I measure my fish," and he said, "If it's under 10 inches, I keep it. If it's over 10 inches, I throw it away, because all I've got is a 10-inch frying pan." Some of us have got a broken ruler and a 10-inch frying pan, and we're limiting everything that we do, everything we experience, by these ridiculous parameters. We're looking at this and say, I can't have more than my parents had because I'm a peoples. And peoples typically don't have those kinds of good things. I can only have a 10-inch pan. God's given us a little bit bigger pan, hasn't He? He's given us a limitless one. And He says, it's all there. And we put these limits on ourselves. And as we look at Philippians, that's where we're going to be headed. We see that all these things around us, and all these limitations that we put on ourselves, those ought not be what rules our lives. Those ought not be where we put our faith. And some of us are in a dark place right now. They got things that are going on in your life that are causing hurts and are causing disruption, that are just breaking your heart, and you really don't know what to do. You're standing there and you're looking at that little ruler, your little fry pan, and you said, that problem is way too big for this. And you're right. It's too big for anything that's going on in your life that you have control over. But it's not too big for God. We ought to be joyful. You know, I'll give you a definition of joy here. It's one that's real easy to remember based on joy. It's Jesus. It's optimism. And it's you. It's what Jesus has done and our optimism to see it, and He's going to change everything about you. So He wants us to have joy. Paul, when he gets here at this Philippians, as he writes that letter, he's caught it. It's something so amazing, so powerful, and it's so important for us that if we'll not let those circumstances around us tell us that you've only got that 10-inch pan, you've only got that 10-inch ruler, and that's all you can do, and live in His joy, who has so much for you. We need to embrace something in our lives that'll change the way we see our lives. And I hope that's what we see as we get into Philippians. But as I started looking into it, I thought, we need to look a little deeper. Instead of just starting with Philippians, we need to start with where Philippians got started, where it came from. You know, we read it and we see, first of all, that Philippians is one of those what we call the jail letters. Where was Paul when he wrote it, when he was having all this joy? He's in jail. That doesn't sound too joyful, does it? So he's there, and how it come about was we got Paul, and we got Silas, and by this time Timothy has joined him on the road, and they're starting his second missionary journey. In fact, let's go there. Let's go to Acts. I want you to go to Acts chapter 16. And we're going to look and see a little bit about how this come about and what it means to you and I today. How the church at Philippi even come into existence. Look at the book of Acts in chapter 16. I'm going to start reading in verse 6. And they, that'd be Paul and Silas and Timothy, went through the region of Phrygia and Galatia, having been forbidden by the Holy Spirit to speak a word in Asia. And when they had come to Mysia, they attempted to go into Asia, Bithynia, but the Spirit of Jesus did not allow them. So passing Mysia, they went down to Troas, and the vision appeared to Paul in that night. A man from Macedonia was standing there, urging him and saying, "Come over to Macedonia and help us." And when Paul had seen the vision, immediately we sought to go into Macedonia, concluding that God had called us to preach the gospel to them. So here's the first thing we find out about the founding of the church at Philippi. It wasn't on Paul's plan. It wasn't what Paul had in mind. It comes about through divine agency, a dramatic moment, and a change up in pitching terms. Bible sort of, we look at that and we read it and we just sometimes just dismiss it and say, yeah, okay, well, he started this way, God told him to go that way, and so that's how the church at Philippi come about. Do you realize that Paul was not only just headed up north in this direction and turned to a different direction and went to Macedonia? You know what that was? That was the first entrance into Europe. How many here are from European descent? Yeah. This is where God turned the gospel to go and create Western civilization. Because Europe at this time wasn't a real happy place. Europe was a warring country, pagans. There was no civilization about the West. This was the early Wild West. We know what happened. We know that it started there in Europe and carried on over to the Americas. How many of you are from America? This is where things got turned in our direction. And we know that the gospel spread throughout the world. But that was the turning point. Paul was headed on into Asia. God said, I got these people down here 2,000 years from now that live in Henderson that need to hear the word then. And it's all keyed on you turning here and now and going to Macedonia. And so he got down there and he got to Philippi. And we'll pick that up down in verse 13. It says, and on the Sabbath day we went outside the gate to the riverside, where we supposed there was a place of prayer, and we sat down and we spoke to women who had come together. One who heard us was a woman named Lydia, a seller of purple goods. She was from Thyatira. And she was there to worship. She was a worshiper of God. The Lord opened her heart to pay attention to what was said by Paul in verse 15. And after she was baptized, and her household as well, she urged us, saying, if you have judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come to my house and stay. And she prevailed upon us. And so they stayed, and that's where things started at Philippi. And they began to walk through the streets, and they began to share the word, and everybody was glad to hear it. Well, maybe not. It says the gospel needs to go places that it's not gone. And this was a place that had never been before. People weren't too anxious to see it. There was something that happened there. There was a slave girl that was following them. She said, these are men of God. And it wasn't a very flattering thing. She wasn't an advertising billboard. She was critical of them. Comes to find out, she's demon-possessed is really what's going on. Comes to find out, the people that owned her were using her to tell fortunes and get rich in the process. But they're crying out, these are the men of God. It says, verse 16, and as we were going to a place of prayer, we were met by a slave girl who had the spirit of divination, brought her owners much gain by fortune telling. She followed Paul and us, crying, these are servants of the Most High God, who proclaim you the way of salvation. And she kept doing this for days. And Paul, having become greatly annoyed, turned and said to the spirit, I command you in the name of Jesus to come out of her. And it came out of her that very hour. But when her owners saw that their hope of gain was gone, they seized Paul and Silas and dragged them into a marketplace before the rulers. And when they had brought them to the magistrates, they said, these men are Jews. They are disturbing our city. They advocate customs which are not lawful for us as Romans to accept or practice. The crowd joined in and attacked them, and the magistrates tore the garments off of them and gave orders to beat them with rods. And when they had inflicted many blows upon them, then they threw them into prison, ordering the jailer to keep them safely. Having received his order, he put them in the inner prison and fastened their feet in stocks. Joy! You want to be on that party? Here at Philippi, the gospel comes, the great news, the happy thing. We got this girl who was entrapped by a demon, and she's freed, and the people should rejoice. What do? They throw Paul and Silas in jail. They beat them, tear the clothes off of them. And what did Paul and Silas do? They said, "Oh Lord, this isn't fair. Oh Lord, this is a horrible thing. Why are you doing this to me, Lord?" You know, if I was Silas, about this time I'd have been looking over at Paul and said, "Paul, you got any more great ideas? This worked out so well, another fine mess you've gotten us into." It's not fair. They beat us. They tore our clothes off of us. Here we are in jail. That's not what they did, was it? What did they do? They sang hymns to God. They prayed to God. They made a joyful noise unto God. About midnight, verse 25 says, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the prisoners were listening to them. I want you to dwell on that verse for just a minute. There's all this adversity, and they're joyful. Yeah, he was a great man of God. We can expect that of him. Not me, but we can expect that of Paul and Silas. But the third part of that, whatever's going on in your life, if you're complaining, if you're joyful, people are listening. People are watching. And they sit out there just like that. They say, "Well, of course you don't have any expectations of me. I'm not a Christian, but he's a Christian. I got expectations of him." They're watching. They're looking. And they're going to know how you react to these things. So, I want to be a part of this church. This is the Philippi church being planted. We've got a woman that's a trader in purple, a businesswoman. We got a just released from demon girl, and we got this suicidal jailer. That's my core team. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to rock and roll with these dudes. How about you? And we find out that as these people are listening, that there's four things here that we need to see. We need to see that they're suffering for doing what was right. And we need to see that even though they were doing what was right, there was a great deal of pain. There was a great deal of agony. And everybody wasn't happy to see them. But in the midst of all that, they were praying and they were singing praises. And people were watching. You know, Mom and Dad, you can't tell these children that you love Jesus when the only time they hear Jesus in your house is because you just stubbed your toe. They won't believe it unless they see it in your life. And when they see you shining through that adversity, they're going to grow up and want that. Those people that are watching you all the time, when they see things in you, they say, "How could you do that?" Y'all remember Ken Carr come and preached here last year while I was gone? This week, his only daughter died unexpectedly. I think it may have been a diabetic thing or something like that. They found her in her house dead, the only daughter they had. If you see Ken, he's going to be celebrating the time that he had with her, not the loss of her now. People are watching to see how he handles that. Pastored the Cotter Church, and people watched him for all those years. And no doubt there's some of them saying, well, let's see how you handle this. I can tell you how he's going to handle it. He's going to handle it with grace. He's going to handle it depending on the love of the Lord. People are watching us. And when they see that, they say, there must be something to this. When we sit around and say, I've been dealt a short hand. Man, I don't have the job that I deserve. I don't have the friends that I need. And then something goes even a more twist with them. Those friends abandon you. The job dismisses you. People are watching and say, let's see how he handles this. Let's see what she does with this when it's her kid that's in detention. Let's see how she handles this. They're watching. So what happened with Paul and Silas? Let's read a little further there in verse 26. And suddenly there was a great earthquake, so the foundations of the prison were shaken. And immediately all the doors were opened, and everybody's bonds were unfastened. When the jailer woke and saw the prison doors were open, he drew his sword, about to kill himself, supposing the prisoners had escaped. But Paul cried with a loud voice, do not harm yourself, for we are all here. And the jailer called for lights and rushed in, and trembling with fear, he fell down before Paul and Silas. Then he brought them out and he said, this is where he's watching. Sirs, what must I do to be saved? And they said, believe in the Lord Jesus and you will be saved, you and your household. And they spoke the word of the Lord to him and all who were in his house. And they took them that same hour of the night and washed their wounds. And he was baptized at once. They didn't even wait. You remember, this is a brand new church. Got this core group here. They didn't wait till the building was built. These guys didn't even wait till daylight. They went right out there and they were baptized then. Now, salvation's over here. Baptism's here. They go together, but they're not the same. You are saved by grace. You are saved by the work that Jesus Christ did on the cross. You are saved by your faith in that and nothing else. Baptism, that's a testimony to the world that this happened to me. That's a proclamation to all the public that I follow Jesus. I love the Lord. They go together. And I believe it should happen immediately. I don't think they should have waited until they went through the building program and got a building with a nice baptistry in it. They shouldn't have waited for that. There's nothing wrong with getting saved today, getting baptized today, as long as you understand why you're baptized. But don't put them together. They're not the same. Once, and like I said, man, I just can't wait to work with this group. The businesswoman, the demon-freed woman, and the suicidal jailer and their family. And this is going to be a powerful church. The church at Philippi, we talk about it being a church of joy. But it didn't start easy. And we get that confused a lot of times. We think that joy must mean happy and must mean easy. That's not what it is. Joy is how you are inside, not the circumstances around you, is it? Sometimes the greatest work that God is going to do in your life, He's going to do in those times of adversity. Through change in plans, through broken expectation, things that you never had in mind that you thought would ever be a part of your life. And that you're praying every day, Lord, don't do that to me. Don't put me in those circumstances. A question come up this morning about patience, and everybody knows I don't want to pray for patience. Because I know how that comes. That comes at a cost. Joy comes at a cost too. See, God is overseeing every event in your life. The things that you find happy, He wants you to find joy in. Those things that happen that aren't happy, He wants you to find joy in those. He cares about every single one of us and the joy in our life, and He wants it to be there. You know, as we get into this Philippians thing, we're going to find that joy or joyful appears about 19 times in those 4 little chapters. And there's another word that appears in there a lot too, and that's mind, or your mindset. Because you see, true joy comes in your mind because of your relationship with Jesus. It's not ever about the circumstances. We're going to see as we look at Philippians, we'll see about 4 things. There are 4 chapters there that I want to point out. We'll wrap this up. But God can give you joy in spite of your circumstances. That 10-inch ruler and that 10-inch pan have got nothing to do with it. In fact, we'll find when we get in chapter 1 that verse 21 is going to be the key there. It says, "For me to live is Christ, and to die is gain." Then in the 2nd chapter, we're going to see that you can have joy in spite of people, even impossible people. It says there in verse 3 of that 2nd chapter, when we get there, it says, "Do nothing from selfish ambition and conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves." And when we get to chapter 3, God can give you joy in spite of things. I've talked a lot this morning about the adversity that's put on us, and we let that rob us of joy. On the other side of that, sometimes we got too much. We've got too many toys. We have too much of a good thing all around us in this great country that we live in. And our focus gets on that instead of where our real joy is. In verse 3, in chapter 3 and verse 7, we'll see, "But whatever gain I had, I counted as loss for the sake of Christ." I count it all loss. And then in chapter 4, God can give you joy in spite of all those worries. You know, sometimes I just get to worrying about things like the election, things like the civil unrest, things like COVID all around us. And I get so worried about that. Paul said, don't worry about those. It says in chapter 4, verse 6 and 7, a couple of our favorite verses, it says, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication. With thanksgiving, let your requests be made known." Be made known to God. And as a result, the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guide your hearts and your minds in Jesus Christ. So as we see the main message of Philippians, it's going to be to discover how to have a joyful life in everything. And you will, if you're willing to turn everything over to God. You know, when you have those pains, don't just grasp onto them and hang on to them. Ask God, what do you want me to learn from this? How am I going to show somebody joy in this? He'll do it. It takes faith. And to have joy takes faith. And don't confuse that with feeling. Because there are going to be times that you're feeling pain like Paul and Silas was here. But their faith never wavered. You have joy by faith, not by feeling. We're going to see that. And we're also going to see as we look at our circumstances today with what's going on around us that no ruler has ever had dominion over a Christian. They may have had physical control over them, but they never have dominion. No matter what happens with this election, the next election, 14 elections from now, your joy is not in who's in the Oval Office. Your joy is not coming from all of the things around us, good or bad. Your joy is not even coming from the accolades of some of those people that watch what's going on in your life and say, you're doing a good job. That's not where your joy comes from. Those may be happy, those may be delightful, but only joy comes from the Lord. He is our hope, and through our faith, He is our joy. You know, we let those things, though, creep in and bind us up, don't we? You know, in Thailand, they have these elephants. They still use elephants for a lot of jobs over there and doing work. And what they do with a young elephant is they take him and they chain him to a big old tree. He pulls on that a few times and he finds out that he can't break that chain. And as Walt Disney tells us, an elephant never forgets. And so as the elephant gets bigger, he's realizing more and more that chain has him bound. And so they can start reducing the size of the tree as he becomes more mature. And if you've ever been around where they've got a circus or even where they have elephants, they drive a little stake on the ground and chain that elephant to that. The elephant doesn't see the stake or the size of the tree. All he sees is the chain. He knows that chain has him restricted, and that chain has him bound. There's a lot of us in this room that are got chains that are binding us, chains that are keeping us from enjoying all the things that God has in store for us. This morning, God wants to break those chains. He wants to set you free, to have joy. He don't want you to be restricted to that 10-inch pan. He don't want you to be tied up with the chains. He wants to set you free and introduce you to joy. Maybe somebody here this morning that's never experienced the salvation of the Lord. You've never experienced joy without that. You see, we talked a little about it before. Jesus died on the cross for your sins. It's just that simple. He died for all sin. But it's up to you to faith that. To say, forgive me, Father. I know that Jesus died for my sins. Forgive me. And He'll break those first chains. It's by faith that you'll break those chains and receive the joy that He has. So I wonder this morning, how many of us that are saved are still letting chains bind us up? And I wonder this morning as we close, would you ask for God to give you a new perspective on that? Even those painful circumstances around you. Ask Him to show you the joy in that. Ask God how I could turn these obstacles into opportunities. Ask God to teach you what true joy really is. What it's all about. And you know what? It's going to make... If you've got that joy, I think that in result, you're going to have a lot more happiness. Because you're going to be able to look at these circumstances around us, as ugly as they are, as doomsday as they seem, and say, they don't matter. I've got joy in my heart. I know joy in my heart. I love the joy in my heart. And it's all because of Jesus that I have joy in my heart. And because of His joy, I'm going to surrender everything. I'm going to surrender my 10-inch pan, my 10-inch ruler to Jesus this morning. As we sing just a verse of I surrender all. It's number 347 in your hymnal if you want to stand with me. We're just going to sing a verse of that. And as we sing, I want you to say in your mind, I'm giving it up. My chains, my pan, my ruler, all those things. And I'm trading them for joy. Father, would you give me that joy? Father, bless us this morning as we prepare to sing. Help us to open up our hearts and see that it is You who are the source of everything that we feel with joy, that only You can provide it. Lord, help us to display Your joy in the world as we go forth in the name of Jesus. Let's sing.